A film of red dust coated everything at Whispering Pines, a fine, gritty blanket over faded memories and crumbling hopes. Jack Callahan stood on the porch, his boots scuffing the loose, splintered wood. The morning sun, already fierce, beat down on the corrugated iron roof, baking the despair that clung to the old house like a second skin. He could taste the dry earth on his tongue, a constant companion in this parched land. His gaze drifted across the yard, past the ancient cottonwood tree whose leaves, even now, whispered secrets to the relentless wind. Its branches, once thick and vibrant, now seemed brittle, barely clinging to life. The ranch stretched out before him, a vast expanse of sagebrush and stubborn mesquite, framed by the distant, jagged teeth of the mountains. This land, his family's land for generations, was slowly reclaiming itself, inch by dusty inch. The fences sagged, their posts leaning like tired old men. The corral stood empty, save for his sturdy roan, Pilgrim, who watched him with knowing, liquid eyes. Jack felt the weight of it all pressing down on him, a physical ache behind his ribs. Every creak of the old windmill, every gust of wind through the broken panes of the barn sounded like a lament. He knew the sounds of this place more intimately than he knew his own heartbeat. In his calloused hand, the crisp paper felt alien, a stark contrast to the rough leather of his saddle or the worn wood of his tools. It was the sales contract, the final document that would sever his ties to everything he had ever known. He had held it for 3 days now, the unsigned pages a testament to his crippling indecision. The legal script, dense and precise, blurred before his eyes. He didn't need to read it. He knew the cold, hard facts it represented. The debt, the failed crops, the drought that had sucked the very life from the soil. The whispers of his ancestors, carried on the wind, felt like accusations against his failure. He was the last Callahan, and he was letting it all go. His fingers tightened, the paper crinkling softly. The sound was small, insignificant, yet it echoed in the vast silence of the ranch. He could almost hear his father's booming laugh, his grandfather's quiet wisdom, both tied to this very ground. Selling felt like a betrayal, a surrender to forces stronger than himself. But what choice did he have? The hope had been drained from him, slowly, relentlessly, like water from a cracked cistern. He had fought, he had toiled, he had prayed, but the land had demanded more than he could give. His blue eyes, usually sharp and clear, were clouded now with a profound, weary despair. He felt hollow, an empty vessel waiting to be filled with the dust of the ranch. Miles away, on the desolate Crimson Creek Road, Eleanor Vance eased her foot off the accelerator. The sleek touring car, a marvel of modern engineering, coughed once, a weak, sputtering gasp, and then fell silent. The sudden absence of the engine's hum was jarring, an unnatural quiet in the vast open country. Eleanor gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She tried the ignition again, the engine turning over with a disheartening grind, then nothing. A wave of frustration, sharp and immediate, washed over her. Her meticulously planned journey, her carefully calculated schedule, had just hit an unexpected, immovable wall. She had chosen this route for its directness, its promise of solitude, but now its emptiness felt threatening. The sun beat down on the black asphalt, shimmering off the heat waves that danced above the road. The air inside the car grew thick and stifling. She pushed open the door, stepping out onto the dusty shoulder. The dry air immediately clung to her, a suffocating embrace. She adjusted the brim of her hat, her intelligent hazel eyes scanning the horizon. Nothing. Not a single dwelling, not a wisp of smoke, only the endless, indifferent stretch of desert. Eleanor was a woman who prided herself on her self-sufficiency, her ability to handle any challenge life threw her way. She had navigated difficult clients, outsmarted shrewd businessmen, and always found a way forward. This broken-down machine, however, was a problem of a different nature. She walked to the front of the car, unlatched the hood, and propped it open. A cloud of hot, metallic air wafted upwards. She peered at the engine, a complex tangle of pipes and wires, none of which offered any immediate, obvious solution to her predicament. The scent of hot oil and gasoline mixed with the dry, earthy smell of the desert. She pulled a handkerchief from her pocket, wiping a bead of sweat from her brow. Her posture remained straight, despite the rising panic in her chest. She would not allow herself to unravel. She would examine the problem, methodically, logically, as she always did. She tried a few connections, jiggled a few hoses, all to no avail. The engine remained stubbornly, defiantly silent. The vastness of the landscape began to press in on her, its silence no longer peaceful but ominous. A lone buzzard circled high above, a patient sentinel. This was not merely an inconvenience. This was a problem that demanded more than her usual ingenuity. She was, for the first time in a long time, truly vulnerable. Back at Whispering Pines, Jack finally tore his gaze from the contract. He folded it carefully, tucking it inside his worn leather vest. The meeting with Silas Blackwood was set for noon in Crimson Creek. There was no escaping it. He walked to the corral, the dust puffing around his boots with each step. Pilgrim whickered softly, nudging Jack's shoulder with his nose. Jack ran a hand along the horse's mane, finding a small comfort in the familiar texture. "Time to go, old friend," he murmured, his voice gruff, betraying little of the turmoil within him. He saddled Pilgrim, the rhythmic creak of the leather, a familiar sound in the quiet morning. He swung himself into the saddle, the familiar weight of the stirrups grounding him. As he rode away from the ranch house, he didn't look back. He couldn't. The image of its decaying beauty, a constant reminder of his failure, was already burned into his mind. The sun climbed higher, relentless, beating down on the long, winding Crimson Creek road. It was a familiar path, one he had traveled countless times, but today it felt different, heavy with the weight of his impending decision. Each hoofbeat seemed to echo the finality of his journey. The air was still, broken only by the rhythmic thud of Pilgrim's hooves and the occasional rustle of unseen creatures in the sparse brush. Jack's thoughts were a tangled mess of numbers, memories, and the bitter taste of defeat. He pictured Silas Blackwood, the smooth-talking land speculator, with his impeccably tailored suits and cold, calculating eyes. Blackwood saw land as a commodity, not a legacy, and Jack despised him for it. Yet, Blackwood held his fate in his soft, uncalloused hands. The injustice of it all gnawed at Jack, a constant, dull ache in his gut. He rode for what felt like an eternity, the miles stretching out before him, indistinguishable from one another. Then, a flicker of something incongruous on the horizon, a dark shape, out of place against the muted colors of the desert. He squinted, the sun glinting off something metallic. A vehicle, he realized, but unlike any he had seen broken down before. This was no farmer's wagon or rickety buggy. As he drew closer, the distinct silhouette of a sleek automobile emerged from the shimmering heat. It stood abandoned, its hood propped open like a gaping mouth, and beside it a lone figure. A woman standing with a proud, almost defiant posture, despite her obvious predicament. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, catching the sunlight. Even from a distance, he could sense her frustration, her struggle. She seemed to be examining the engine, her movements precise, yet ultimately futile. The image was striking, a vibrant splash of humanity against the stark, indifferent canvas of the desert. Jack's initial thought was to ride past. He had his own problems, his own burden to carry. He was on his way to sign away his life, and he had no energy left to spare. But something held him back. A flicker of an old instinct, a deep-seated code of the West that demanded aid for those in distress. Or perhaps it was something else entirely, a subconscious yearning for a distraction from his own despair. He saw the glint of the sun off the polished chrome of her car, the elegance of her dress, so out of place in this rugged landscape. Her very presence was an anomaly, a disruption in the desolate monotony of his day. His curiosity, long dormant under the crushing weight of his troubles, began to stir. He urged Pilgrim forward, the horse's gait steady and deliberate. The dust swirled around them, rising in a soft cloud behind them. As he closed the distance, he could make out more details. The confident curve of her jaw, the way her shoulders remained straight, even as she wiped at smudges on her hands. She turned, sensing his approach, her head lifting, her hazel eyes meeting his across the dusty expanse. There was no surprise in her gaze, only a cool assessment, a hint of challenge. Jack pulled his horse to a halt, the creak of the saddle leather loud in the sudden quiet. A silent question passed between them. The sun beat down, a relentless hammer on the land. Jack's horse shifted slightly, its breath warm in the still air. He had pulled up a good distance away, giving the stranded woman space. Her eyes, a striking hazel, held a challenge he recognized in himself. She wore a dress, practical, but clearly not for roadside repairs, and her hands were already smudged with grease. He watched as she slammed the hood of her automobile down with a frustrated sigh, her shoulders rigid with stubborn pride. Eleanor Vance had faced greater obstacles than a broken engine. Her journey across these desolate miles had been meticulously planned, every contingency considered. Yet here she stood, defeated by a simple sputter and hiss, the silence that followed more jarring than any engine noise. A man on horseback, a weathered figure against the glare, had stopped. His offer of help, though unspoken, was clear. She felt a prickle of irritation. She did not need rescuing. She never had. Her fingers trembled slightly as she tried to unfasten a stubborn bolt. The metal was searing hot to the touch, the desert heat a tangible weight pressing down. She felt the stranger's gaze upon her, a silent assessment that chafed against her independent spirit. She straightened, turning to face him fully, her chin lifted a fraction. "I can manage," she called out, her voice clear despite the dryness in her throat. The words felt like a shield, a defiant declaration against her current predicament. Jack heard the firmness in her tone, the unspoken, "Thank you for your concern, but I am perfectly capable." A faint smile, quickly suppressed, touched his lips. He knew that kind of pride. He lived with it every single day. The sun was already dipping towards the distant, jagged mountains. Shadows began to lengthen, painting the sagebrush in hues of purple and gold. This road was no place for anyone after dark. The coyotes would be singing their mournful songs soon. He dismounted slowly, the creak of leather a loud sound in the quiet. His boots crunched on the loose gravel as he walked towards her. He moved with a practiced ease, a man accustomed to vast distances and open skies. He stopped a respectful few feet away, his piercing blue eyes still holding that quiet assessment. "Ma'am," he began, his voice low and gravelly, "that's a long walk to Crimson Creek, and that sun won't wait." His gaze flickered towards the horizon, then back to her. Eleanor felt a flush rise to her cheeks. She knew the truth of his words. Crimson Creek was miles away, a place she had hoped to reach before sunset. The silence of the desert night was not a comforting thought. Still, her independence bristled. She glanced at her hands, still grimy, then at the unresponsive engine. Her breath hitched. She had tried everything she knew, every trick her father had taught her about engines. The car remained stubbornly inert. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. The air felt thick with dust and the scent of dry earth. To accept help felt like admitting defeat, a bitter pill she was not accustomed to swallowing. Yet the thought of being alone out here, with the temperature dropping and the vast darkness descending, sent a shiver down her spine. The rational part of her mind, the part that always planned and calculated, urged her to reconsider. "I have some tools," she said more to herself than to him, her voice softer this time. She bent down, fumbling with a wrench, but her movements were less confident now. The metal slipped in her perspiring hand. It clattered to the ground, kicking up a small cloud of dust. She straightened quickly, embarrassment burning hot on her face. Her hazel eyes, usually so self-assured, now held a flicker of desperation. Jack watched her, noting the slight tremor in her hands, the strained set of her jaw. He saw the fight in her, the fierce determination to prove herself capable. He admired it, even as he knew it was futile in this specific moment. This wasn't a matter of skill, but of circumstance. The desert demanded a different kind of respect, a recognition of its unforgiving nature. His own weary muscles ached from a day of ranch work, and the prospect of a hot meal and a quiet evening felt like a distant dream. "It's more than tools you'll need," he stated, his voice devoid of judgment, simply stating fact. "That engine's cooked, ma'am, or something close to it." He nodded towards the car. "You won't get it running tonight. The light's fading fast. You need a safe place, at least until morning." He paused, letting his words sink in. He wasn't offering charity. He was offering a practical solution to a shared problem. His ranch, Whispering Pines, was the closest shelter for miles around. Eleanor looked at him, truly looked at him, for the first time. His face was weathered, lines etched by sun and hard work. But his eyes, though piercing, held no malice. There was a gruff honesty about him, a quiet strength that was almost unsettling. She was accustomed to men who tried to charm or condescend. This man simply observed, then spoke plain truths. Her stomach rumbled, a small, traitorous sound that betrayed her dwindling reserves. Her meticulously planned journey had veered wildly off course. Her independence, usually her greatest asset, now felt like a heavy burden. She had envisioned reaching Crimson Creek, finding a respectable inn, and arranging for repairs in the morning. This dusty road, this broken machine, and this silent, watchful cowboy had disrupted everything. She hated feeling dependent, hated the thought of accepting help from a stranger. But the cold reality of the desert night, the unknown sounds, the sheer vulnerability of her situation gnawed at her resolve. She pictured herself huddled in her car, the wind howling, feeling completely isolated. The image made her shiver despite the lingering heat. To refuse him now would be sheer folly, a stubbornness that bordered on recklessness. Her mind, always logical, finally conceded. "Where would I go?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, the fight draining out of her. It was not a question of mistrust, but of practicalities. She had her pride, but she also had her good sense. To admit defeat was one thing. To put herself in an unknown situation was another. She watched him, waiting for his answer, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. "My ranch," Jack replied, his gaze unwavering. "Whispering Pines. It's not much, but it's got a roof and four walls, and a bed." He saw the hesitation in her eyes, the flicker of apprehension. He understood. He was a stranger. She was alone, but there was no other choice out here. "You can get a proper start on it in the morning. I'll take you back to town, find you a mechanic." His words were direct, almost curt, but beneath them lay a genuine offer of protection. Eleanor weighed his words, the quiet sincerity in his tone. He didn't promise comfort or luxury, just safety and shelter. Her logical mind confirmed the necessity. Her pride still smarted, but it was overruled by the undeniable truth of her predicament. She was stranded, vulnerable, and a long way from anywhere familiar. To refuse would be foolish. To accept felt like stepping into the unknown, a leap of faith she rarely took. A sigh escaped her, one of resignation and a hint of something like relief. "All right," she conceded, the single word feeling heavier than she expected. "I accept your offer. For the night." She met his gaze directly, a silent agreement passing between them. There was no warmth in her acceptance, no gratitude yet, only a weary practicality. She felt a strange mix of relief and resentment. Jack nodded, a small, almost imperceptible movement. He turned towards her automobile, his experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. He reached into his saddlebag, pulling out a coil of rope. "We'll secure this here," he explained, his voice businesslike. No sense leaving it unlocked. He moved with purpose, his strong, calloused hands expertly tying down the hood, making sure nothing would be disturbed overnight. The scent of dust and leather clung to him. Eleanor watched him work, a grudging admiration stirring within her. He was efficient, practical, and wasted no movements. His presence, initially a source of irritation, now felt oddly reassuring. The vastness of the desert no longer seemed so threatening with him nearby. A strange, unfamiliar warmth began to spread through her, chasing away some of the chill of her vulnerability. She found herself studying the way his muscles flexed under his worn denim shirt. He finished securing her car, ensuring the doors were locked and the windows rolled up as much as possible. He then walked back to his horse, a sturdy bay with intelligent eyes. He grasped the reins, turning to her. "Come on," he said, holding out a hand. His palm was rough, calloused, a working man's hand. He waited, patient, but his gaze held a quiet expectation. Eleanor hesitated. To take his hand meant a physical connection, a further surrender to this unexpected circumstance. But she was exhausted, mentally and physically. Her legs ached from standing, and her head throbbed from the heat. She looked at his outstretched hand, then at the horse, a creature far larger than anything she was accustomed to riding. Her own experiences were with the latest automobiles, not with horses. She took a deep breath, pushed aside her reservations, and placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, surprisingly gentle despite its roughness. A jolt, unexpected and electric, shot through her arm. Her fingers locked around his, a sudden, almost involuntary reflex. The brief contact made her heart skip a beat. She quickly pulled her hand away, a faint blush creeping up her neck. She felt a strange flutter in her chest. Jack felt the soft touch of her skin against his, the unexpected spark that passed between them. He suppressed a flicker of surprise. He had not touched a woman's hand with such deliberate care in a very long time. He kept his expression neutral, but a warmth spread through his palm, lingering even after she withdrew her hand. He gestured towards the horse's flank. "Up you go, I'll help." Eleanor moved closer to the horse, its hide warm and musky. She felt awkward, unsure how to hoist herself onto the saddle. She glanced at Jack, a silent plea in her eyes. He was already positioning himself behind her, his hands hovering near her waist. "Put your foot in the stirrup," he instructed, his voice low. She followed his direction, her boot finding the metal loop. As she pushed herself up, he placed his hands firmly on her waist, guiding her. Her body brushed against his, a fleeting, intimate contact that sent another jolt through her. She felt the strength of his arms, the solid warmth of his body. For a fraction of a second, she was acutely aware of his masculine presence, the scent of dust and horse, and something else, something uniquely his. Her breath caught in her throat. She settled into the saddle, a little breathless, her cheeks flushed. He swung himself up behind her with effortless grace, his movements practiced and smooth. His proximity was sudden, overwhelming. She could feel the solid press of his chest against her back, the warmth of his leg against hers. She instinctively stiffened, her muscles tightening. This was far more intimate than she had anticipated. Jack felt her rigid posture, her slight recoil. He understood. He was a stranger, and she was in a vulnerable position. He shifted slightly, trying to create a tiny space between them, a small gesture of respect. But the horse's saddle was narrow, and the desert road bumpy. Their bodies were undeniably close. He took up the reins, his large hands guiding the horse forward. The horse began to walk, its hooves kicking up small puffs of dust. The sun, now a fiery orange orb, was beginning its descent behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in a blaze of colors. The air grew cooler, carrying the faint, sweet scent of sagebrush. The vast expanse of the desert stretched around them, silent and watchful. Eleanor tried to focus on the landscape, on the changing colors of the sky, but her awareness was consumed by the man behind her. His presence was a tangible thing, a warmth at her back, a subtle shift of weight with every step the horse took. She could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, feel the faint vibration of his chest against her. It was unsettling, yet strangely comforting. She had never been this close to a man she barely knew. Her mind raced, trying to process the rapid succession of events. From the meticulous planning of her journey to being stranded, accepting help, and now riding through the twilight with a taciturn cowboy. Her independent spirit, so fiercely guarded, felt exposed, vulnerable in this unexpected intimacy. She wondered who he was, what his life was like, what kind of ranch awaited them. 1,000 unspoken questions swirled in her mind. Jack, too, was acutely aware of the woman in front of him. Her scent, a subtle mix of something floral, and the faint metallic tang of the broken car drifted back to him. Her hair, dark and neatly styled, brushed against his chin occasionally. He felt the tension in her body, the way she held herself stiffly. He knew she was uncomfortable, probably wary. He couldn't blame her. He usually rode alone, his thoughts his only companions. The silence of the desert was familiar, a balm to his often troubled mind. But now it was different. Her presence filled the space, creating a new kind of silence, one charged with unspoken curiosity and a nascent awareness. He wondered about her, about the kind of woman who traveled alone across such distances in a motorcar. She was clearly not from around here. He glanced down at her, seeing the slight tremble of her shoulders. He felt an unexpected pang, a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself to feel in a long time. It was a sense of protection, a quiet responsibility for her safety. He found himself thinking about the ranch, about its dilapidated state, and a faint flush of embarrassment warmed his neck. It was hardly a suitable place for a woman like her. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, plunging the landscape into a soft purple twilight. The stars began to prickle through the darkening sky, vast and indifferent. The air grew colder still, and Eleanor found herself hunching her shoulders, a shiver running through her. Jack felt the movement and, without a word, adjusted his position slightly, letting his body provide a small shield against the chill. She felt a subtle shift, the quiet warmth spreading from his chest to her back. It was not a deliberate embrace, but a simple, almost unconscious act of consideration. A strange sensation bloomed within her, a mix of gratitude and a deepening awareness of the man who held the reins. She still felt uncomfortable, but the edges of her apprehension began to soften. They rode in silence, the only sounds the rhythmic thud of the horse's hooves, the creak of leather, and the whisper of the wind. The vast, indifferent beauty of the desert unfolded around them. Eleanor stole a glance back at Jack, but his gaze was fixed straight ahead, his profile etched against the fading light. He seemed lost in his own thoughts, a solitary figure even with her in front of him. Her earlier resentment had faded, replaced by a quiet contemplation. This man, Jack Callahan, was an enigma, gruff, practical, yet possessing an unexpected gentleness in his actions. She tried to piece together details about him, but his silence offered no clues. The quiet awareness between them grew, a subtle current flowing beneath the surface of their enforced proximity. She wondered what tomorrow would bring, what new challenges and revelations this unexpected detour would present. Jack felt the weight of her presence, a foreign but not unwelcome burden. His mind, usually consumed by the ranch's impending sale and his crushing despair, was now subtly diverted. He found himself wondering about her destination, her life, the reasons for her solo journey. A fragile thread of curiosity, long dormant, had awakened within him. He pushed away the familiar thoughts of failure and loss, focusing instead on the path ahead. The air smelled of dry earth and sage, a scent that had always meant home but now felt different, imbued with a new, unspoken meaning. The silence between them was thick, not empty, but filled with the weight of two strangers forced together by circumstance. It was a silence rich with unasked questions and a growing, unsettling awareness of each other, an awareness that pulsed beneath the surface of the vast desert night. The old ranch house loomed before them, a gaunt silhouette against the fading light. Paint peeled from its clabbered walls like sunburnt skin, and the porch sagged, groaning softly under the weight of years. Eleanor's sharp eyes absorbed every detail, from the dusty, cobweb-laced windows to the skeletal remains of what might have once been a vibrant garden. A broken shutter hung askew, rattling a mournful tune in the rising evening wind. The air itself tasted of dry earth, sagebrush, and a deep, pervasive neglect. Jack dismounted with a weary sigh, the sound barely audible above the creak of the old wooden gate. He moved with a practiced economy of motion, leading his horse to a small, dilapidated corral that smelled faintly of stale hay and old leather. Eleanor slid off the horse's back, her boots crunching on the gravel path. She watched Jack, her gaze assessing the subtle slump of his shoulders, the way his calloused fingers absently traced the worn wood of the fence post. His face, etched with a fatigue that went beyond mere physical exertion, seemed to mirror the desolation around them. This was more than just a home. It felt like a tombstone to forgotten dreams. A knot tightened in Eleanor's stomach. She had expected hardship, perhaps even squalor, but not this profound, almost spiritual decay. The ranch was not merely run down, it was broken, like its owner. Jack turned, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers for a fleeting second before he looked away, a flicker of something akin to shame crossing his features. "It's not much," he murmured, his voice a low rumble, rough like the desert wind. "But it's shelter." Eleanor said nothing, her throat suddenly tight. She simply nodded, her gaze sweeping over the cracked earth, the dormant fields, the distant, jagged mountains that seemed to mock the ranch's vulnerability. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken histories and the weight of their disparate worlds. Jack gestured towards the house with a slight tilt of his head. "Come on, I'll get some water for the horse, then we can find you a place inside." Inside, the house was cool, but a suffocating scent of dust and disuse hung heavy in the air. Moonlight filtering through grimy window panes, cast long, distorted shadows across the wide wooden floorboards. Each step they took echoed hollowly through the empty rooms. Jack led her to a small, sparsely furnished room at the back of the house. A narrow bed covered with a thick, patch quilt occupied one wall. A rickety wooden table held a single, unlit oil lamp. The window looked out onto the vast, silent expanse of the ranch, where the wind whispered through unseen grasses. "It's clean," Jack said, his voice flat, gesturing vaguely at the room. "I keep it aired out for, well, just in case." He didn't elaborate, and Eleanor didn't ask. Her fingers instinctively brushed against the rough cotton of the quilt. Despite its age, it felt surprisingly soft beneath her touch. She noticed a faint, almost imperceptible scent of lavender, a ghost of someone else's care. A flicker of warmth, like a tiny candle flame in a vast, dark room, sparked within her. Jack placed a metal basin of fresh, cool water on the table, alongside a bar of plain soap and a surprisingly clean towel. "You can wash up," he offered. "I'll get some kind of supper ready." He turned to leave, his footsteps heavy on the creaking floorboards. Eleanor watched him go, a strange mix of gratitude and pity swirling within her. He was trying, she realized, despite everything. Left alone, Eleanor slowly moved around the room. Her fingers traced the rough grain of the wooden walls, the dust motes dancing in the moonlight. She opened the window, letting in a gust of cool, dry air that smelled of sage and distance, hoping it would dispel the feeling of stagnant despair that clung to the house. She splashed the cool water on her face, feeling the grit of the road slowly wash away. The soap was unscented but cleansing. She felt a deep weariness in her bones, a tiredness that went beyond the physical journey. It was the weariness of unexpected displacement, of being thrust into a world so vastly different from her own carefully ordered existence. A while later, the faint aroma of something cooking drifted through the house. It was simple, perhaps just stewed beans or dried meat, but it was food. Eleanor emerged from her room, her hair neatly repinned, her dress brushed free of the worst of the dust. She found Jack in a small, cramped kitchen, bending over an old cast-iron stove. The flickering light from a single lamp cast his face in stark relief, highlighting the deep lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. He didn't look up immediately, lost in the rhythm of stirring a pot. Eleanor watched him for a moment unobserved. His shoulders were rounded, not from age, but from the invisible weight he carried. There was a profound sadness in the stillness of his posture, a quiet despair that seemed to permeate the very air around him. It was the kind of sorrow that settled deep in the bones, a constant companion that never truly left. Her initial impression of him, that gruff, unyielding cowboy, began to soften, to blur around the edges. She saw now not just a man of the land, but a man burdened by it, haunted by it. He finally turned, sensing her presence, and the mask slipped back into place. His face became once again a closed book, revealing little. He motioned toward a small, battered wooden table. "It's ready," he said, his voice clipped, almost terse. The meal was indeed simple, a bowl of hearty beans, a slab of cornbread, and a tin mug of strong black coffee. Eleanor ate slowly, savoring the warmth and the sustenance. It was plain food, but prepared with a functional care that spoke of routine, not joy. "You've lived here long?" Eleanor ventured, attempting to break the heavy silence that had settled between them. She watched him carefully, trying to gauge his reaction. Jack paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. His blue eyes, usually so guarded, flickered with a distant memory. "My whole life," he replied, his voice low. "My father before me, and his father before that." He took a slow swallow of coffee, his gaze fixed on some point beyond the window, out into the impenetrable darkness. His words were few, but they painted a picture of generations rooted in this harsh, beautiful land. "It's a vast place," she continued, hoping to encourage him, to draw him out. "And lonely." He nodded slowly, a wry, almost bitter twist to his lips, lonelier than most folks could imagine. He didn't elaborate, didn't offer any explanation for his solitude, or for the silence that now enveloped him like a shroud. He simply ate, his eyes occasionally scanning the room as if searching for something, or perhaps just confirming its emptiness. Eleanor felt a strange ache in her chest. She wanted to know more, to understand the story behind the lines on his face, the quiet despair in his eyes. But his demeanor was a clear barrier, a wall he had meticulously built around himself. She tried again. Your automobile, did you manage to ascertain the problem earlier? Jack shook his head, a dismissive wave of his hand. Not tonight. Too dark. Not enough light for a proper look. He paused. It's a new contraption, isn't it? Never seen one quite like it out here. His voice held a hint of curiosity, a faint spark in the otherwise dull landscape of his conversation. Eleanor allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. It's a touring car, a 1910 model, quite advanced for its time, though perhaps not for this terrain. She felt a brief flash of pride in her machine, a connection to the world she had left behind. Touring, you said, Jack asked, his brow furrowed. Where were you headed, if you don't mind me asking? His question was devoid of accusation, simply a desire for information. Eleanor hesitated for a moment. Her journey was her own, her independence a fiercely guarded possession. But here in this desolate place, with this weary man, it felt less like an intrusion and more like a simple human inquiry. West, she replied vaguely. Further west than Crimson Creek. I have business there. She didn't specify the nature of the business, unwilling to share too much. Jack merely grunted in response, a non-committal sound that indicated he neither approved nor disapproved, merely accepted. The conversation dwindled, sputtering out like a dying flame. Eleanor found herself observing him again, her gaze lingering on his strong, weathered hands as he carefully cleaned his plate. There was a quiet dignity in his movements, a sense of ingrained habit and responsibility that belied his obvious despair. She wondered about the life he had lived on this ranch, the joys and sorrows that had shaped him. She could almost feel the echoes of past laughter and tears within these walls. The ranch, despite its decay, felt like a living thing breathing its last, and Jack was its sole, sorrowful guardian. As the evening wore on, the silence in the house deepened, broken only by the mournful sigh of the wind outside and the occasional crackle from the dying embers in the stove. Jack rose, gathering their few dishes. I'll get these cleaned, he said. You should try to get some rest. It's been a long day. His voice was gentle, a stark contrast to his earlier clipped tones. Eleanor nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief and disappointment. She had wanted to talk more, to understand, but his retreat was absolute. He showed her to the outhouse, a small, leaning structure behind the house, then left her with an unlit lantern and a final, quiet goodnight. Back in her room, the darkness pressed in, heavy and complete. She lit her own small candle, its flame dancing in the still air, casting flickering shadows on the rough-hewn walls. She lay down on the narrow bed, pulling the thick, surprisingly warm quilt up to her chin. The scent of lavender was stronger now, a comforting, almost maternal presence in the stark room. It made her wonder about the women who had lived here before, the hands that had stitched this quilt, the lives that had unfolded within these walls. Sleep did not come easily. Her mind raced, replaying the day's events. The desolate road, the broken car, Jack's gruff kindness, and the overwhelming sense of loss that clung to him and his ranch. She saw his face in the flickering lamplight, the profound sadness etched into every line, the way his eyes seemed to hold an entire world of unexpressed grief. She felt the chill of the wind seeping through the old window panes, the creak of the house settling around her. Every sound seemed amplified in the vast silence of the night, each whisper of the wind carrying an echo of his unspoken pain. The image of the dilapidated ranch, its faded glory, and the quiet desperation she sensed emanating from Jack haunted her. It was a stark reality, raw and unvarnished, a world away from her own carefully constructed existence. She saw the potential in the land, the strength in the man, but she also saw the deep chasm of despair that threatened to swallow both. She closed her eyes, trying to force sleep, but the weight of his quiet suffering felt palpable, pressing down on her. The ranch was a monument to a life slowly fading, and Jack, she realized, was fading with it. Eleanor woke to pale dawn light, the thin blanket offering little warmth. Sleep had been scarce in the silent, vast ranch house. Images of faded grandeur and quiet neglect from yesterday filled her mind. She pushed herself from the narrow bed. Her gaze found a tarnished silver frame. It showed a younger Jack, in his 20s, flanked by an older man and woman, their faces beaming. A contemplative ache stirred within her. It felt like a tapestry woven from generations. A soft clanking drew her to the window. Jack was already at work, a lone figure moving with burdened grace, his strong silhouette etched against the brightening sky. She watched his broad shoulders, carrying a subtle slump. His worn denim shirt was already dusted. He carried a heavy bucket, its handle catching sunlight. Eleanor felt admiration for his resilience and empathy for the despair around him. Crushing responsibility marked his every movement. He paused by a weathered fence, surveying the arid landscape. The air was still. Only the windmill's lazy creak broke the silence. His calloused hand touched a loose fence post, a deep connection to this land. She saw lines etched on his face, testament to worry and toil. His piercing blue eyes, though weary, held an ancestral glint. She understood Whispering Pines was an extension of his being, woven with his bloodline. The neglect was not indifference, but a bone-deep weariness. He moved with practiced ease. He checked the watering trough, then murmured gentle words to a horse in the corral. His voice was a low rumble, tender and affectionate. His connection to creatures and soil was an open book. Dust clung to everything, a reminder of the harsh environment. His strong, calloused hands had built and struggled. Now they might be preparing to let go. Her heart ached. His pride, ancient and entwined with the soil, was a heritage on the brink. The sun climbed higher. Eleanor knew she could not remain an idle observer. She dressed quickly, her practical dress feeling out of place. Her independent nature bristled at waiting. She preferred action. Leaving her room, she followed sounds to the weathered barn. Jack struggled to hoist a heavy sack of feed onto a rickety wagon. "Can I help with that?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady. Jack started, dropping the sack. His head snapped up, blue eyes wide with surprise. A flicker of annoyance or embarrassment crossed his rugged face, quickly masked. He hesitated, jaw tightening in stubborn refusal. His self-reliant nature recoiled. "It's fine," he mumbled gruffly. He hunched, grunting with renewed effort. Eleanor walked closer, seeing the tremor in his arm, sweat on his brow. He was deeply tired, carrying an invisible weight. She moved to the other side of the wagon. "Two people are better than one for heavy lifting," she stated, matter of fact. Before he could protest, she braced herself. Her strong hands gripped the coarse burlap. It was heavier than expected, scratching her palms. Her muscles tensed with determination. Jack watched her, his expression unreadable. He saw her unwavering resolve, her steady eyes, her quiet strength. A grudging respect stirred within him. He nodded once. "All right," he conceded, his voice stiff. "On three." They counted together. With combined effort, they lifted the heavy sack. Its weight pressed them near. His shoulder brushed hers, a fleeting proximity. They heaved it onto the wagon, a cloud of dust rising. Eleanor wiped her brow. Jack straightened, breathing wearily. He looked at her, a hint of something new in his gaze, a quiet acknowledgement. "Thanks," he said, the words stiff. Eleanor nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She felt quiet satisfaction. The sun grew stronger, warming the air thick with hay and dust. They worked together, an unspoken rhythm developing. Jack pointed out a dilapidated fence. Eleanor, without instruction, picked up a hammer and nails. Her practical intelligence grasped the task. She struck nails with surprising accuracy. Jack watched, astonishment on his face. He noticed her dark hair, now in unruly tendrils. Jack repaired a broken gate hinge nearby. The heat built steadily. A wasp circled Eleanor's head as she swung the hammer. Her aim faltered. The hammer, slick with sweat, slipped. Jack, with quick reflexes, caught it. His rough fingers brushed hers. An electric contact. The brief contact sent a sharp, unexpected jolt through them both. Eleanor's hand tingled. Her breath caught. Warmth spread through her chest, her heart thumping. Her startled eyes met his. Their gazes locked, held by the unexpected intensity. In his blue eyes, she saw confusion, then raw awareness. His breath caught, shoulders stiffening. The warmth in her hand lingered. The air thickened, charged with unspoken energy. Ranch sounds faded, leaving only them. The connection snapped. Jack's eyes darted away, fixing on the hammer. He cleared his throat. "Careful," he mumbled, rougher now. He offered the hammer back, re-establishing distance. Eleanor took it, fingers tingling, eyes on the ground. A blush crept up her neck. The moment hung heavy, undeniably shifted. She felt overheated, her pulse racing. They finished the fence and gate, working with shared focus. The accidental touch created new tension between them. Jack retreated to the stable to tend Bess, his mare. Eleanor, needing a moment, fetched water from the well. Walking past the stable, she heard a low murmur. She paused. Out of sight, Jack was talking, his voice soft, laden with sorrow. He spoke to Bess, stroking the mare's mane with tenderness. The stable air held hay and horse scents. "It's almost time, girl," Jack murmured, his voice thick with sorrow. "Almost time to say goodbye to all of this." Eleanor froze, her hand on the well bucket forgotten. Her heart lurched. He spoke of the ranch, she realized, the impending sale. The words, a private confession to Bess, laid bare the desperation she had sensed. "Don't know how I'm going to do it, Bess," he continued, his voice cracking. "This land, it's not just land. It's in my blood. My grandpappy, my daddy, they worked this ground. And now—" He trailed off with a shuddering sigh. Eleanor felt his raw grief, understood the suffocating weight of heritage he carried, the responsibility of letting it go. He patted Bess's neck. "Silas Blackwood, he's coming tomorrow. The papers will be signed." The name sounded bitter. Eleanor's mind raced. It was true. This proud man was losing everything. His shame and solitude now made sense. It was the brutal severing of his identity, his family's legacy. A muffled gasp escaped him, swallowed by the stable air. Eleanor's eyes pricked with unshed tears. She saw him not just as a rancher, but as a man undone, clinging to what defined him. The silence after his words was thick with anguish. She felt overwhelming empathy for his loss. Eleanor stood, the water bucket forgotten. Her chest ached with his revealed sorrow. She could not walk away, pretending not to hear him. She took a shaky breath, then slowly, deliberately, stepped out from behind the stable doorframe. The soft scuff of her footfall reached him. He stiffened instantly, hand pausing on Bess's flank. He turned slowly, blue eyes still clouded with raw emotion, caught grieving. For an instant, he looked startled, utterly exposed. His vulnerability was stark. Their eyes met across the dusty corral. The world receded. It was just them, suspended in a charged space. Eleanor's heart hammered. She saw surprise, then deeper recognition in his eyes. Her gaze was unwavering, filled with profound understanding. She did not look away even as his face tightened, struggling to regain composure. The air crackled with their shared secret, his grief and undeniable connection. They held the gaze, a silent conversation passing between them. A spark of recognition, raw and away, passed between them. It was more than seeing, it was knowing, a sudden mutual understanding. Something profound had shifted, connecting them in unanticipated ways. The depth of their connection, forged in empathy and grief, left them breathless. The air in the corral still shimmered with unspoken electricity, even after their gazes finally broke. Jack cleared his throat, a rough sound in the quiet morning, and turned back to tightening a saddle cinch. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, but his mind raced. Eleanor stood a few feet away, her presence a curious warmth in the otherwise solitary expanse of his routine. He felt exposed, seen in a way he hadn't been in years. The thought brought a knot to his stomach. He was a man accustomed to keeping his troubles close, buried deep beneath a stoic exterior. Eleanor watched him, her hazel eyes tracing the lines of weariness etched around his mouth. She saw the subtle tremor in his hands, the way his shoulders seemed to carry an invisible weight. The encounter by the corral had been too intense, too sudden to simply dismiss. It had left her unsettled, a feeling she rarely allowed herself to entertain. She was a woman who valued control, who plotted her path meticulously. Yet, here on this desolate ranch, control felt like a fragile thing, slipping through her fingers. The sun climbed higher, bathing the dusty yard in a golden light, but the warmth felt distant from the chill that had settled inside her. "I suppose you should know," Jack began, his voice low, almost swallowed by the vastness of the land. He didn't turn to face her, instead busying himself with adjusting a stirrup. His words were strained, as if each one dragged itself from a deep well of exhaustion. Why I'm here? Why this place looks the way it does? The admission hung in the air, a raw, unvarnished truth waiting to be unveiled. He felt a tremor of fear, a primal instinct to retreat, to keep his shame hidden. But something in Eleanor's steady gaze, even from his periphery, compelled him forward. Eleanor remained silent, her posture attentive, her gaze unwavering. She could sense the immense effort it took for him to speak. Her own heart began a slow, deliberate thrum against her ribs. She braced herself, knowing that what he was about to reveal would be deeply personal, a burden he had carried alone for far too long. The dry scent of sagebrush filled her nostrils, a constant reminder of the land's unforgiving nature, mirroring the harsh realities she suspected he would soon lay bare. A faint breeze rustled the leaves of a lone cottonwood tree, a whispering echo in the silence. Jack finally turned, his blue eyes meeting hers, clouded with a profound sadness that seemed to seep into the very air around them. This ranch, he swept a hand out, encompassing the weathered house, the creaking windmill, the wide-open plains, whispering pines. It's been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built this house with his own hands. My father expanded it, worked himself to the bone. His voice grew thick, a rough edge of pride and pain intertwining. Now I'm about to lose it all. The last words were barely a whisper, an admission that tore at the fabric of his being. A sharp ache, sudden and unexpected, pierced Eleanor's chest. She had seen the signs of decay, the neglect, but the truth of it, spoken aloud with such raw agony, hit her with surprising force. Her usual analytical mind, quick to assess and solve, found itself momentarily stunned. She simply looked at him, allowing the weight of his confession to settle between them. The dust motes danced in the sunlight, tiny specks of life in the quiet despair. A fly buzzed lazily past her ear, a jarring, normal sound in the midst of a deeply abnormal revelation. The drought, Jack continued, his gaze drifting over the parched land, as if the very sight of it explained everything. Hit us hard, years ago. Then the bank loans. My father, he took out more than he could handle trying to keep things afloat. He believed in this place, believed it would turn around. A bitter laugh escaped him, devoid of humor. He died 3 years ago, trying to fix a pump during a dust storm. Left me with nothing but debt and a promise I couldn't keep. His voice cracked on the last words, a profound vulnerability he couldn't hide. Eleanor felt a surge of protectiveness, an unfamiliar emotion that rose swiftly within her. She recognized the look in his eyes, the quiet desperation of a man backed into a corner, burdened by a legacy he couldn't uphold. She had seen such despair before, though never so intensely, never so intimately. The harshness of the western landscape suddenly seemed less an adventure and more a relentless opponent. The dry air felt heavy, pressing down on them both. She imagined the sheer physical toil, the endless struggle against the elements that had defined his family's existence here. I've tried everything, Jack admitted, his voice a low, gravelly confession. Worked sunup to sundown, skimped on everything I could, sold off half the herd last year, just to make the interest payments. His hand clenched into a fist, the knuckles white. But it's not enough. It's never enough. The bank wants their money. And Silas Blackwood, he's been circling like a buzzard for months. He swallowed hard, the shame a bitter taste on his tongue. I'm supposed to meet him in town today, to sign the papers. The mention of signing the papers brought a fresh wave of quiet devastation to his face. He averted his gaze, unable to meet her eyes, as if the act of speaking the words aloud made the reality of it too concrete, too painful. His breath hitched, a silent internal struggle playing out before her. The smell of horses, usually comforting, now seemed to deepen the sense of impending loss. He felt the weight of his ancestors' expectations, their sweat and toil pressing down on him, judging his failure. The sun felt less like a source of warmth and more like an unblinking eye, witnessing his defeat. Eleanor's mind began to work, finally sorting through the information. Blackwood, the land speculator. She had heard rumors about him even in her travels, a man who preyed on the desperate, buying up ranches for a song. The picture of Jack, strong and capable, yet brought to his knees by circumstances beyond his control, filled her with a fierce, quiet anger on his behalf. She understood the pride of self-sufficiency, the sting of being unable to conquer one's challenges. It was a feeling she knew well, though hers had rarely involved a family legacy quite so profound. It's not just the land, Jack continued, his voice barely audible now. It's their dream. It's my whole life. Every stone, every fence post, it's got a piece of them in it, a piece of me. His eyes, once so guarded, now shone with unshed tears, reflecting the vast, empty sky above them. He looked down at his calloused hands, hands that had worked this earth, that had inherited the same strength and resilience as those before him. Now those same hands were poised to sign away everything. The weight of that contradiction, the ultimate failure, was crushing. A single tear escaped the corner of his eye, tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. It was a raw, unbidden display of emotion, a crack in the hardened facade he had maintained for so long. He didn't try to wipe it away, perhaps too overwhelmed, too lost in the current of his pain to care. It was the first time in front of another person that he had allowed such a profound weakness to surface, a testament to the unexpected trust that had formed between him and this stranger. The memory of his father's final, desperate efforts flashed through his mind, twisting the knife of his grief. Eleanor watched the tear fall, a silent witness to his unraveling. Her heart throbbed, a steady, aching beat. She saw not just a rancher facing ruin, but a man grappling with the loss of identity, of heritage, of purpose. His pain resonated deeply within her, stirring an empathy she hadn't known she possessed in such measure. She understood the weight of expectation, the burden of a name, the quiet struggle to carve out one's own path while honoring the past. The air grew still, holding its breath around his sorrow. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Eleanor lifted her hand. It moved with a quiet certainty, drawn by an instinct she couldn't name, an impulse to offer solace, to bridge the chasm of his sorrow. Her fingers hovered just above his arm, close enough to feel the faint warmth radiating from his skin, but not quite touching. It was a gesture born of pure, unadulterated compassion, a silent offering of support. She saw the tremor in his hands, the way his jaw was clenched, and the overwhelming desire to soothe that pain was almost physical. She imagined the rough texture of his worn denim shirt, the strong muscles beneath. She felt the urge to steady him, to let him know he was not alone in this moment of profound despair. But her hand remained suspended, a fraction of an inch away. She hesitated, a silent debate raging within her. To touch him now in his rawest moment might be to break the fragile dam holding back the torrent of his grief, or it might be an intrusion, an overstep into a private agony. The decision not to touch, to let the gesture remain unspoken and unmade, was an act of profound respect, of honoring the sacred space of his pain. Her own breath caught in her throat. She understood then, truly understood, the depth of his connection to this land. It wasn't just property, it was lineage, memory, identity. It was the very earth that held the echoes of his family, the wind that whispered their names through the pines. To lose it was to lose a part of his soul. The weight of his impending loss settled onto her shoulders, a burden she felt almost as acutely as he did. The warmth of the sun on her skin felt cold against the sudden chill of his despair. Jack, for his part, felt the subtle shift in the air, the faint current of warmth that emanated from her poised hand. He didn't look up, but he sensed her presence, her silent witness. It was a strange comfort, this unspoken understanding. He was not alone in this moment of humiliation, this unraveling of his life's purpose. The shame still burned, but a tiny flicker of something else, something akin to relief, stirred within him. Her stillness, her unwavering attention, gave him permission to simply feel without judgment. He could taste the salt of his own tears on his lips. The silence that followed his confession was heavy, profound. It was not an empty silence, but one pregnant with the unspoken acknowledgement of his pain, the weight of his impossible choice. The vastness of the ranch, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to amplify the quiet despair. Eleanor's gaze remained fixed on him, her hazel eyes reflecting the deep sorrow she now shared. She felt an unexpected ache in her own heart, a profound empathy for this proud, broken man who stood before her, his life hanging by a thread. The world around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them, bound by a moment of raw, shared vulnerability. An unexpected ache settled deep within Eleanor, a quiet echo of Jack's raw confession. The weight of his sorrow had shifted, settling onto her own heart, making the air in the small ranch house feel thick and still. She looked at him then, truly seeing the lines etched around his eyes, the subtle tremor in his strong hands, and a profound empathy stirred within her. This man, so burdened by silent grief, had let her witness his deepest vulnerability. Her gaze drifted past him, taking in the small, familiar details of his kitchen, a worn wooden table, a chipped enamel coffee pot, and then, through the window, the faint gleam of metal. She saw the main watering trough, usually the lifeblood of any ranch, leaking a slow, steady stream. It was a minor thing, perhaps, a constant drip that seemed to disappear into the thirsty earth, but it spoke volumes. Jack, so overwhelmed, had stopped noticing the small erosions of his ranch, the tiny battles being lost day by day. His despair had blinded him to such simple, tangible problems. "Jack," she said, her voice soft, cutting through the heavy quiet. He looked up, his blue eyes still clouded with the remnants of his pain, startled by her sudden utterance. "That trough outside," she continued, nodding towards the window. "It's losing water." He followed her gaze, a flicker of something unreadable passing over his face. He knew about the leak, of course, but it had become just another invisible burden, one more thing too small to fix and too large to ignore. It was part of the general decay, a symptom of his fading hope, not a problem with a solution. Eleanor stood then, moving towards the window, her posture still straight and composed, yet with a new softness around her eyes. "It's not just a drip," she observed, her sharp mind already assessing the situation. "It's a constant drain. You're losing precious water, especially in this heat." She turned back to him, a practical glint in her hazel eyes. "Do you have any old canvas or thick cloth? Some tar, perhaps? We could fashion a temporary patch." Jack blinked, taken aback. His own thoughts had been spiraling downward, caught in the bitter currents of his impending loss. He had not considered such a simple, immediate fix. He had only seen the larger, insurmountable mountain of debt and despair. Her suggestion was like a sudden, unexpected breath of fresh air in a suffocating room. "Tar," he mumbled, trying to pull his mind back to the present. "Yes, there's some in the barn, for roofing repairs, I suppose." He pushed himself from the table, feeling a strange mix of faint irritation and profound relief. Irritation that he, a rancher, had overlooked something so basic, and relief that someone else had seen it, and even more had offered a solution. He walked to the barn, Eleanor following closely behind. The afternoon sun beat down, turning the dust into a golden haze. The silence between them was different now, still heavy, but infused with the quiet hum of unspoken purpose. It felt less like a chasm and more like a shared space. In the barn, the air was thick with the scent of hay, old leather, and sun-baked wood. Jack rummaged through a dusty corner, pulling out a dented tin of tar and some stiff, worn canvas. He felt a faint blush creep up his neck, realizing how long these items had sat unused, just like so much else on his ranch. Eleanor knelt by the trough, inspecting the leak with a focused intensity. Her fingers, though slender, were capable, tracing the hairline crack in the wood. "We'll need to dry it first," she said, not looking up, "and something to press the patch firmly." Jack found a few pieces of sturdy wood and a shovel to clear away the damp earth around the leak. He worked mechanically at first, his mind still wrestling with the morning's raw honesty. But as they began to prepare the surface, a subtle shift occurred. Eleanor's instructions were clear, her movements precise. She didn't hover or criticize. She simply observed, then suggested, her voice calm and steady. He watched her, a woman whose hands were clearly unaccustomed to such rough labor. Yet she handled the coarse canvas without complaint, her brow furrowed in concentration. The sun was warm on his back, and the rhythmic scrape of his shovel against the earth became a grounding force. He handed her the tar, its thick, earthy scent rising in the heat. "Careful," he warned, his voice gruffer than he intended. "It's sticky." She met his gaze. a small smile playing on her lips. I imagine it is. She then began to apply the tar with a piece of wood, spreading it carefully over the canvas patch. Her movements were unexpectedly graceful even in this dirty task. Jack found himself anticipating her next need, handing her the hammer, then a small nail, their hands brushing once, briefly, sending a faint jolt through him. He quickly averted his eyes, focusing on the trough, but the warmth of her skin lingered. A rhythm began to develop between them. He held the patch in place, pressing it against the leak, while she hammered in the small nails around the edges, securing the canvas. The sharp metallic clink of the hammer against the nail, the soft splash of water as it finally stopped dripping, and their coordinated breathing filled the afternoon. The quiet hum of shared effort replaced the heavy silence that had plagued him for so long. It was the first time in what felt like years that he wasn't alone in his struggle. Then, a small mishap. As Eleanor leaned in to give a final firm tap, her foot slipped on a loose stone. She stumbled, catching herself just before she fell, sending the hammer clattering against the trough with a loud clang. She let out a small, surprised yelp, then a burst of genuine laughter, the sound bright and unexpected in the quiet ranch yard. Jack straightened up, his own lips twitching. The sight of her, covered in a smudge of tar on her cheek, her hair slightly disheveled, and her eyes sparkling with mirth, was utterly disarming. He hadn't heard such unburdened laughter on his ranch in a very long time. He felt a chuckle rise from his own chest, rusty and unfamiliar, but undeniably real. It was a deep, rumbling sound, catching him by surprise. "You all right?" he asked, the words still carrying the ghost of a laugh. She nodded, wiping the tar smudge with the back of her hand, only smearing it further. "Just a bit clumsy," she admitted, still grinning. "I'm better with ledgers than with hammers, I suppose." "You did well," he said, his voice softer than before, a genuine warmth spreading through him. He reached out, his calloused thumb gently wiping the tar from her cheek. Her skin was surprisingly soft beneath his touch, and her eyes, wide and luminous, met his. The moment stretched, a fragile, unspoken connection arcing between them. The sun, dipping lower now, cast long shadows across the yard, painting them in hues of orange and gold. The air itself seemed to hum with the lingering warmth of their shared laughter, a lightness neither had expected to find here. They finished the repair, the leak now reduced to an occasional, almost imperceptible seep. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It was a victory, small but significant, a testament to their combined efforts. As they walked back to the house, the sky was ablaze with the dying light of the day, painting the distant mountains in fiery shades. The ranch, usually a place of quiet despair for Jack, felt different. It felt alive somehow. Inside, Eleanor insisted on helping with the evening meal. She found some dried beans and a piece of cured meat, working efficiently, her movements economical and practiced. The simple act of preparing food together, the quiet clinking of pots and pans, filled the small kitchen with a new kind of warmth. The air soon smelled of simmering beans and strong coffee, a comforting aroma that chased away the lingering scent of dust and tar. They sat at the worn wooden table, the oil lamp casting a soft golden glow over their faces. The meal was simple, but after the day's work, it tasted like the finest feast. There was no need for conversation, no pressure to fill the silence. It was a comfortable quiet, a shared understanding that had deepened with every shared task, every glance, every unexpected moment of laughter. It felt like coming home, a feeling Jack hadn't known in years. He watched her as she ate, her movements graceful even as she consumed the rustic meal. Her presence in his house, in his life, was a strange, beautiful anomaly. He had been so utterly alone for so long, and now here she was, bringing with her a quiet strength, a sharp mind, and a capacity for joy he had forgotten existed. The thought of her leaving, of this fragile, newfound peace dissolving back into the desolate silence, sent a cold dread through him. It settled in the pit of his stomach, heavy and unwelcome. The day, a blur of work and unexpected connection, was drawing to a close. The light from the lamp flickered, casting their shadows long across the rough-hewn walls. Jack found himself wishing the sun would simply refuse to rise, wishing this day, this fragile moment of shared purpose and quiet companionship, would stretch into an endless evening. The thought of Eleanor leaving felt like a cold dread in the pit of his stomach, a stark reminder of the isolation that awaited him once she was gone. The first light of dawn painted the sky in muted shades of lavender and pale gold, a gentle awakening for a world that still felt heavy with the night's cool air. Jack stood by the kitchen window, his gaze fixed on the eastern horizon, the bitter taste of yesterday's coffee lingering on his tongue. He had spent a restless night, the silence of the ranch amplified by the unusual sound of another person breathing under his roof. Now the quiet promise of her imminent departure settled upon him like a shroud. A faint whisper of wind stirred the dry leaves outside, a sound that usually brought him a strange comfort. This morning, however, it seemed to carry a note of melancholic resignation. He felt a peculiar ache in his chest, a sensation he had not recognized in years, one that tightened with every tick of the old grandfather clock in the hall. It was the dread of an ending, a premonition that the warmth Eleanor had brought, however briefly, was about to vanish. Eleanor emerged from her room dressed as neatly as ever, her dark hair still pulled back with an elegant simplicity. She carried a small, sturdy valise, the kind that spoke of practical journeys and self-reliance. The scent of her, subtle and clean, momentarily filled the stale air of the ranch house, a fragrance entirely foreign to the perpetual aroma of dust and old wood. Jack turned, his blue eyes meeting hers, across the dim room. A flicker of something undefinable passed between them, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken intimacy that had grown in such a short time. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and even, yet with a softness Jack hadn't heard before. He managed a gruff nod. "Morning, Eleanor." His throat felt unexpectedly tight, making his words come out rougher than intended. He wanted to ask her to stay, to offer some reason, any reason, for her to linger a little longer. But pride in the deep-seated habit of solitude held his tongue captive. He watched her, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she set her valise down, a hint of vulnerability he knew she rarely showed. Just then the distant rumble of a vehicle echoed across the vast open land. It grew steadily louder, a stark intrusion on the ranch's usual morning quiet. Jack's heart sank, a cold stone dropping into his stomach. He knew instinctively what it meant. His jaw tightened, and he walked to the front door, pushing it open just as a dusty, well-worn wagon pulled up to the gate. A man, his face tanned and creased by years under the sun, sat on the wagon's bench, reins held loosely in his hands. He was a traveling merchant, his wagon laden with goods, making his way toward Crimson Creek. He offered Eleanor a ride, explaining his route perfectly aligned with hers. Eleanor, ever pragmatic, accepted with a polite nod and a small, grateful smile. Her car, though temporarily coaxed back to life, was not yet reliable for a long journey, and the merchant's offer was a welcome relief from another day of uncertainty. Jack stood rooted to the spot, the rough wood of the doorframe digging into his palm. He felt a sudden, inexplicable sense of loss, a vast emptiness opening up before him. The sun, now higher, beat down on his face, but he felt an internal chill. This was it, the moment he had dreaded since the previous evening, since the warmth of their shared meal had settled between them. He watched as Eleanor retrieved her few belongings, her movements efficient and determined. Every rustle of her dress, every step she took towards the wagon, felt like a deliberate withdrawal from his world. He wanted to reach out, to say something profound, something to mark the abrupt end of their brief, intense connection. But the words caught in his throat, tangled with a lifetime of unspoken emotions. "Well," Eleanor began, turning back to him, her eyes searching his. The air crackled with unspoken sentiments, a heavy blanket of silence settling over them. She offered him a small, almost imperceptible smile, tinged with a sadness that mirrored his own. "Thank you, Jack, for everything." Her voice was soft, barely a whisper, yet it resonated deeply within him. "It was nothing," he mumbled, instantly regretting the dismissive tone. It was not nothing. It had been everything. It had been a glimpse of a different future, a sudden blinding light in the suffocating darkness he had grown accustomed to. He cleared his throat, trying to find a more adequate response, but the moment slipped away. Eleanor's gaze dropped to her hands, then back to his face. I wish you well, Jack," she said, her voice a little firmer now, as if steeling herself. "With the ranch, with everything." There was a depth in her eyes, a genuine concern that surprised him. It wasn't pity, it was a profound empathy, an understanding of the burdens he carried. He simply nodded, unable to articulate the turmoil raging within him. His heart pounded against his ribs, a wild drumbeat of despair and burgeoning hope, warring within his chest. He felt a desperate urge to ask her name, her real name, not just Eleanor Vance, but the essence of who she was, where she came from, where she was going. But it felt too late, the wagon waiting, the merchant growing impatient. Then she did something unexpected. Reaching into the pocket of her dress, Eleanor pulled out a small folded piece of paper. It was clearly torn from a larger sheet, creased and slightly worn. She unfolded it carefully, revealing a simple, hand-drawn map. The lines were precise, the handwriting neat. "This is for you," she said, extending it towards him. Her fingers brushed his as he took the paper, sending a jolt through him. A sudden electric current that made him catch his breath. The contact was fleeting, barely there, yet it left a lingering warmth on his skin. He looked down at the map. It was a clear, concise drawing, marking out the winding route to a small town a day's ride west of Crimson Creek. A circled X marked a specific building. "There's a mechanic there," Eleanor explained, her voice gaining a practical edge again, though her eyes remained soft. "Old Man Hemlock. He's got a reputation for fixing anything, no matter how broken. He'll know what to do with your truck if you ever decide to get it properly fixed." Jack's gaze shifted from the map to her face. A skilled mechanic for his old, perpetually unreliable truck. It was such a practical gesture, so utterly Eleanor. Yet woven into the simple lines and carefully chosen words was an undeniable thread of care. She remembered his truck, his struggles, his needs, even as she prepared to leave him behind. It was a sign that she had truly listened, truly seen him beyond the gruff exterior in the failing ranch. The paper felt strangely warm in his hand, a small, tangible piece of her consideration. "Thank you," he managed, his voice hoarse. It felt inadequate, a mere whisper against the magnitude of what she had given him. He wanted to tell her what it meant, how her presence had stirred something long dormant within him. He wanted to tell her that she had made him look at his ranch, at his life, with new eyes. But the words remained trapped, unspoken. Eleanor offered another small, sad smile, then turned and walked towards the waiting wagon. Each step she took felt like a step away from the life he had known for the past 2 days, a step back towards the desolate existence he had believed was his destiny. She climbed gracefully onto the wagon bench, settling in beside the merchant. Their eyes met one last time across the dusty distance, a look that lasted a beat too long, filled with all the things they couldn't say, all the possibilities that would now remain untaken. The merchant flickened the reins and the wagon lurched forward, slowly picking up speed. The creak of the wheels, the rhythmic clopping of hooves, grew fainter with every passing moment. Jack stood motionless, the small map clutched in his hand, watching. He watched as the wagon became a smaller and smaller speck against the vast, indifferent landscape. He watched until the last wisp of dust settled, until the wagon had completely vanished over the distant rise. The silence that descended upon the ranch then was absolute, profound. It was a different kind of silence than he was used to. Not the familiar, comforting quiet of his solitary life, but a deafening emptiness, a stark void where laughter and conversation had so recently been. The air, which had briefly held the faint, sweet scent of Eleanor, now only smelled of dry earth and sagebrush, the familiar scents suddenly feeling foreign and cold. He walked slowly back into the ranch house, his boots scuffing on the worn floorboards. The house felt vast and hollow, the sunlight streaming through the dusty windows illuminating motes dancing in the empty air. The warmth she had brought, the flicker of hope she had ignited, seemed to have evaporated with her departure, leaving behind an unbearable chill. He ran a hand over his face, the rough stubble of familiar comfort in the overwhelming desolation. His gaze fell upon the kitchen table, where the ranch sale contract lay exactly as he had left it. The thick parchment, covered in his dense, unfeeling legal script, seemed to pulse with a renewed, menacing weight. It lay there, waiting for his signature, a stark reminder of the choice he was about to make before she had arrived. Now the paper felt heavier than ever, laden with the ghost of a shared moment, the shadow of a life he might have had. The unsigned sale contract lay on the kitchen table, a stark white rectangle against the worn wood. Its presence was a silent, mocking challenge, a tangible reminder of the choice that loomed. Each day that passed, the paper seemed to absorb more weight, not just its physical form, but the unspoken words it contained, the grim future it threatened to seal. A full week had slipped by since Eleanor had left the ranch, and the silence that settled over Whispering Pines now pressed in on Jack, heavier and more profound, amplified by her absence. He found his gaze drifting over the document, but his hands remained stubbornly at his sides. He simply could not bring himself to touch the crisp sheets, much less to lift a pen and sign away his life. Her memory had not faded. Instead, it had taken root in every corner of the ranch house, a vibrant ghost of life that moved just beyond his sight. He would turn a corner and half expect to see her elegant figure framed by the kitchen window, her attention caught by something far across the sagebrush plain. He heard the faint echo of her clear voice, a thoughtful tone as she asked about the land, its history, its potential. He felt the phantom warmth of her gaze on his weathered face, a look that had been both curious and understanding. The spaces she had so briefly, yet so completely, filled now felt cavernous and cold, amplifying the emptiness she had left behind. He walked the dusty paths he had known intimately his entire life, each rut and stone familiar beneath his boots. But now he saw them through different eyes, imbued with a new kind of significance. He often found himself pausing, his gaze following the familiar lines of the distant mountains, their peaks a rugged silhouette against the vast sky. He noticed the subtle, ever-changing shifts in color across the sagebrush plain at dusk, how the purples deepened into indigo, how the fading sunlight painted the earth in hues he had always overlooked. The way the last light of day caught the gnarled branches of the old oak tree near the creek, stretching its long, distorted shadows across the dry, cracked earth, suddenly held a stark beauty he had long ignored, dismissed as mere background. Eleanor had possessed an observer's keen eye for these details, a quiet, almost reverent appreciation that had somehow transferred itself to him, a subtle magic he now carried. He would stoop down, his fingers closing around a small, unusually shaped rock, turning it over in his palm, remembering her fascination with the intricate patterns she found in the dirt, the stories she imagined in the ancient stones. A relentless battle raged within him, a ceaseless, wearing war that tore at his spirit. On one side stood the cold, hard facts of his crushing debt, an undeniable truth that whispered of ruin. On the other, the burgeoning, inconvenient hope Eleanor had ignited, a fragile flame flickering against the winds of reality. Logic screamed in his mind, a shrill, insistent voice that told him the ranch was a lost cause, a burden too heavy for one man to bear alone. The numbers were clear, stark figures that marched across his mental ledger, a relentless, unforgiving tally of every penny he owed, every failed season, every mounting interest payment. He could picture Silas Blackwood's smug, self-satisfied face, the man's easy smile promising a ready solution, an end to this crushing weight if only Jack would surrender. But then the memory of Eleanor would rise, a calming counterpoint to the insistent clamor of his fears. He remembered her steadfast presence, her quiet strength as she worked beside him, her hands capable and sure, her brow often furrowed in thought. He recalled the way her hand had almost reached for his one afternoon, a fleeting, unspoken connection that had nevertheless vibrated through him. He heard the clear pride in her voice when she spoke of self-sufficiency, of making things grow, of living off the land's honest bounty. He saw the fierce spark that had ignited in her hazel eyes, a reflection of her unwavering conviction. That spark had lit something deep within him, a flicker of forgotten purpose he had thought long extinguished by years of struggle and loneliness. Could he truly walk away from this land, the very soil that held his heritage, after seeing its potential anew, after glimpsing a different, brighter future reflected in the strength of her spirit? The smell of dry earth, usually a deep comfort, a scent of home, now felt like a silent accusation. reminding him of the profound abandonment he was about to commit. The wind, sighing and whispering through the ancient pines, seemed to carry her unspoken questions, her gentle yet firm challenge echoing in the rustling needles. He often found himself pausing mid-step, staring at the scarred, weathered planks of the old barn. In his mind's eye, he imagined how they might look with a fresh coat of deep red paint, how the sagging fences could be mended, each post straightened, each wire tightened. He pictured how new life could truly return to this quiet, decaying place, envisioning laughter and the sound of children, the lowing of cattle, the rustle of healthy crops. It was a foolish, impractical dream, he knew, a whisper of fantasy in the face of brutal fact. Yet it clung to him with a stubborn, undeniable grip. Then the small, leather-bound pouch arrived. The mail carrier, a young woman named Sarah, handed it to him with a sympathetic nod. Its contents were sealed with a formal wax stamp, hard and brittle, burrowed to the touch. Jack recognized the Blackwood and Associates insignia instantly, a wave of cold dread washing over him. He tore it open with a slow, deliberate movement, the crisp paper crinkling sharply in the sudden amplified quiet of the kitchen. Inside, a curt, formal letter lay on thick, cream-colored stationery. It informed him, with chilling precision, that the final deadline for the ranch sale was now swiftly approaching. It was an unmistakable, chilling reminder, solidifying his fears. The language used was precise, almost surgical in its cold detachment, meticulously outlining the terms of the agreement and the specific legal repercussions should he fail to sign the contract by the appointed date. It mentioned breach of contract, immediate financial penalties that would further cripple him, and the potential for a forced sale under terms far less favorable than those already offered. The words themselves were sterile, devoid of any human emotion, yet they carried the immense, crushing weight of inevitable consequence. Silas Blackwood's patience, it seemed, was finally nearing its very end. Jack's fingers tightened around the crisp paper, the edges biting into his skin, his knuckles turning a stark white. He could feel the cold, impersonal threat radiating from the document, a palpable, hostile energy. The memory of Eleanor's face, so clear, so etched into his mind, warred fiercely with the stark, unforgiving reality laid out before him on the page. This was not a dream, not a fleeting whisper of hope, but a concrete, unavoidable decision that demanded an answer. He slowly raised his eyes from the cold, legal document, then looked out at the vast, silent land stretching endlessly beneath the wind, indifferent sky. A fierce, protective ache began to grow in his chest, a feeling he had not known for years, a forgotten part of himself awakening. The cold, legal document lay on the table, still unsigned, a silent, mocking testament to his failure. Jack stared at the thick parchment, then let his gaze drift through the window, across the vast, silent land of whispering pines. A fierce, protective ache, one he had not allowed himself to feel in years, began to spread through his chest. It burned, pushing back against the numbness, against the quiet despair that had become his constant companion. He remembered Eleanor's eyes, their intelligent hazel depths, as she looked at this same land, a quiet respect in her gaze. She had seen something in it, something he had almost forgotten. A splintered section of fence, leaning precariously near the north pasture, became a focal point for his new, raw resolve. He remembered the feeling of the rough wood beneath his hands, the familiar grain, the scent of pine. This fence had stood strong for generations, just like his family, marking the boundaries of their dreams. Now it was broken, much like he had been, but it was not beyond repair. The sun beat down, relentless and unforgiving, but Jack felt a different kind of heat now, a fire rekindled within him. He grabbed his tools, the familiar weight of the hammer and the bag of nails a comfort against his palm. Each swing of the hammer was a beat of defiance, a rejection of the surrender that had almost claimed him. The metallic clang echoed in the quiet air, a rhythm of rebuilding, of reclaiming. He pulled out the old, rotted posts, their wood crumbling under his touch, leaving gaping holes in the earth. He drove new ones deep into the dry soil, feeling the reverberation through his arms, up to his shoulders, a physical affirmation of his renewed purpose. His muscles, long accustomed to hard labor, remembered their strength, And with each nail driven home, a knot of dread in his stomach began to loosen. He worked until the sun dipped below the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, the kind of beauty he had stopped noticing. The sweat trickled down his back, stinging his eyes, but he ignored it. He was building something more than a fence. He was rebuilding himself, piece by painful piece. Eleanor's image flickered in his mind. Her proud stance, her resourceful hands, the way she had looked at him, not with pity, but with an understanding that cut straight to his core. She had shown him that resilience was not just an idea, it was a way of living. He leaned against the newly repaired fence, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but a profound, almost forgotten satisfaction settled over him. The next morning, the barn, a silent sentinel of forgotten dreams, called to him. It was a cavernous space, filled with shadows and the lingering scent of old hay and dust. For years, it had been a place he avoided, a monument to what he had lost, what he was about to lose. Now he pushed open its creaking doors, letting in a flood of sunlight that illuminated dancing motes of dust and the stark reality of its neglect. He breathed in the familiar earthy air, a blend of wood, straw, and the faint, sweet smell of horses that were no longer there. He began to clear away the clutter, the broken parts of forgotten machinery, the piles of old feed sacks. Each item he touched brought a memory, a flicker of a time when this place buzzed with life and purpose. He uncovered an old forge, its bellows cracked, its anvil rusted, but beneath the grime, the shape of a tool, a craft, a way of life. He found his father's branding iron, cold and heavy in his hand, a symbol of ownership, of identity. He ran his calloused fingers over the smooth, worn handle of a shovel he remembered using as a boy, standing beside his father, learning the rhythm of the land. The weight of these forgotten tools, the feel of the rough wood and cold metal, stirred something deep within him. They were not just objects, they were extensions of his heritage, silent witnesses to generations of Callahan labor. He started cleaning them, wiping away years of neglect, polishing the rust from blades, oiling the dry joints. As he worked, a sense of order began to return to the barn, and more importantly, to his own spirit. He saw the potential beneath the decay, the echoes of a vibrant past that could still be rekindled. The quiet satisfaction of honest work, of making things right, filled him with a surprising lightness. He imagined Eleanor walking through this barn, her discerning eyes taking everything in, perhaps offering a practical suggestion or a quiet word of encouragement. Her presence had been a jolt, a disruption to his carefully constructed despair. She had made him look, really look, at his world again, not just through the lens of loss, but through the possibility of renewal. He could almost hear her clear, articulate voice, cutting through the dusty silence, asking him what he truly wanted. And he knew now, with a certainty that thrummed through his veins, that he wanted to fight for this. The challenging task of replanning his finances followed, a daunting mountain of numbers and obligations. He spread out the old ledgers on the kitchen table, their pages brittle and yellowed with age. The smell of dust and old paper filled the air as he flipped through them, tracing the careful script of his ancestors. Then his father, then his own, charting the slow, inevitable decline. Each entry was a painful reminder of lost battles, of debts accrued, of dreams deferred. The numbers on the page were cold, hard facts, reflecting a reality that had seemed insurmountable just days before. He sharpened his pencil, the lead scraping softly against the paper, and began to rework the figures. He had always seen only one path, surrender. But Eleanor's presence had opened a crack in his rigid thinking, letting in a sliver of light. She had shown him that problems often had overlooked solutions, that resourcefulness was a powerful weapon. He remembered her calm demeanor, her quick mind, the way she had assessed his broken fence and offered a simple, practical fix. He began to look at his own problems with a similar objectivity. He started identifying areas where he could cut costs, where he could potentially earn a little more, selling off small portions of land he could manage without, perhaps leasing out some pasture. The ideas were tentative at first, fragile sparks in the overwhelming darkness of his debt. But as he wrote them down, as he calculated the possibilities, they began to solidify, to grow stronger. The scratching of his pen against the paper became a defiant murmur, a quiet rebellion against the fate he had almost accepted. The dim light of the lamp cast long shadows across the table, making the numbers dance, but his focus remained unwavering. His heart thumped a steady rhythm against his ribs, a mixture of fear and fierce determination. He was walking a tightrope, every step uncertain, but he was walking it on his own terms. He was no longer passively waiting for the inevitable. He was fighting. He was fighting for the legacy of Whispering Pines, for the memory of his father, for the quiet dignity of his own existence. He was fighting for the land, for the scent of sagebrush and dry earth, for the jagged mountains that stood guard over his world. He was fighting because Eleanor had reminded him what it felt like to have something worth fighting for. He closed the ledgers, a new tentative plan etched in his mind, his hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the surge of adrenaline, of purpose. The final act remained. The unsigned sale contract, thick and ominous, still lay on the kitchen table, a stark challenge to his newfound resolve. Silas Blackwood's name, printed in a precise, almost clinical font, seemed to sneer up at him from the page. This was the document that would seal his fate, that would sever his connection to everything he held dear. He picked it up, feeling the heavy parchment in his hand, the crinkle of the legal script under his thumb. It felt cold, impersonal, devoid of any human warmth, a stark contrast to the living, breathing land it sought to claim. He remembered the shame that had coiled in his gut every time he looked at it, the crushing weight of his failure. But that shame was now being replaced by something else, something hotter, more defiant. He pictured Blackwood's smug, calculating face, his soft hands, his utter lack of understanding for the deep connection a man could have to his land. A glint, sharp and uncompromising, entered Jack's eyes. He could not abandon this land. He could not betray his ancestors. He could not let the memory of Eleanor's quiet strength fade into the dust. This ranch was not just property. It was a part of him, woven into his very bones. To sign this document would be to sign away a piece of his soul. He had almost done it, almost let despair win. But something had changed. Something in the quiet strength of a stranded woman had woken him up. He held the contract tighter, his knuckles white, his breath catching in his throat. This was not just a piece of paper. It was the embodiment of his struggle, his sorrow, and now his defiant hope. He looked out the window one last time, at the vast, silent expanse of Whispering Pines, bathed in the pale light of dawn. The land seemed to breathe with him, a quiet affirmation of his decision. He pulled the document closer, feeling its resistance, its cold legal grip. With a resolute breath, Jack tore the sale contract in half. The sharp, ripping sound echoed through the quiet ranch house, loud and clear, like a gunshot of freedom. A plume of dust, dark against the searing midday sun, announced the arrival long before the carriage. Jack stood on the worn porch, his hands on the railing, dry sage filling his lungs. A desert stillness hummed with insects, a quiet anticipation. The ranch's familiar weight, every creaking board and sun-baked stone, now felt like a shield. The sleek black carriage, pulled by two groomed horses, contrasted sharply with the rugged land. It slowed, wheels crunching on the gravel drive, stopping before the porch. Silas Blackwood emerged, impeccably dressed. His dark suit was an affront to the dust and heat of Whispering Pines. A thin, impatient smile touched his lips, a mere ripple on his cold demeanor. He adjusted his cufflinks, his gaze sweeping the ranch house, then settling on Jack with practiced condescension. Callahan, Blackwood's smooth voice carried an urban sophistication out of place here. Punctual as expected, your adherence to deadlines is commendable, given the circumstances. He stepped onto the porch, his polished boots silent, a faint scent of expensive tobacco preceding him. Jack did not move, his eyes locked with Blackwood's. A quiet strength radiated from Jack, a strength the man would not recognize. Blackwood, Jack replied, his voice a low, steady rumble, stripped of deference. He saw Blackwood's eyes tighten, a flicker of irritation at the lack of subservience. Jack had seen that look before, but it held no power over him now. Wind rustled the cottonwood leaves, a gentle whisper against the growing tension. I trust you have the documents ready. Blackwood said, reaching into his inner coat pocket. He produced a crisp folder, its edges sharp. We can finalize this quickly, I imagine. A mere formality now, wouldn't you agree? He held out the folder, expecting Jack to take it. Sunlight glinted off the brass clasp. Jack did not take the folder. He watched Blackwood's hand, then his eyes. There will be no formalities today, Blackwood, he said, his voice unwavering, each word carefully placed. The air thickened, suddenly heavy. Even the insects seemed to fall silent. Jack felt his pulse beat against the silence. Blackwood's smile faltered, a slow, almost imperceptible shift. His extended hand dropped slightly. I beg your pardon, Callahan. His tone sharpened, disbelief replacing smugness. He looked around as if for a hidden joke. The sale is off, Jack stated plainly, meeting Blackwood's gaze without flinching. A strange lightness filled his chest, a freedom he had craved. The words felt right, a truth long overdue. He thought of Eleanor, her independent spirit, her view of the land. A fresh wave of resolve washed over him. Blackwood's face hardened, his thin smile vanishing. Off, he repeated, contempt dripping from the single word. Are you quite mad, Callahan? We have an agreement in principle. I have made arrangements. This is not some trifling matter you can simply call off. His voice rose, losing its cultured smoothness. There is no binding agreement until ink touches paper, Blackwood, Jack countered, his voice still low, controlled. He remembered the torn contract, the satisfying rip. He had done the right thing. He thought of the dusty barn, the tools he had rediscovered, the promise of renewal. Do you understand the ramifications? Blackwood stepped closer, his expensive boots scuffing the worn wood. He loomed over Jack, attempting intimidation. I have expended resources. My time is valuable. Your debt, Callahan, is not going anywhere. It will only grow. Jack felt the old fear flicker, the cold dread of months past, but a new, fiercer emotion overshadowed it, a protective instinct for his land. I understand perfectly, he said. I will manage my debt. The ranch is not for sale. Blackwood gave a short, incredulous laugh. Manage your debt? You, Callahan? You can barely keep paint on your walls. This place is a wreck, a forgotten relic. It is a burden, not an asset. Do you think I have not done my research? He gestured at the faded house, the peeling paint. His words aimed to sting Jack's pride. Jack's jaw tightened. A deep ache in his chest came from the truth in Blackwood's words. The ranch was neglected. He had neglected it, but that was before. It is my wreck, Jack said, his voice gaining quiet intensity. And it is my burden, and it will be my triumph. He pictured Eleanor's sharp eyes, her practical solutions, her belief in the land's potential. He saw the ranch through her eyes now, not as decay, but as a canvas for new beginnings. Blackwood scoffed, running a hand through his hair. Triumph? You speak of triumph teetering on financial ruin? I offer you a way out, Callahan. A clean break. This land is bleeding you dry. It always has. He leaned in, his voice dropping. How many ranchers in your position wish they had my offer? To simply walk away? I do not wish to walk away, Jack replied, his gaze unwavering. He remembered Eleanor's hand near his arm, the unspoken comfort, a connection that reawakened something within him. Her map, her quiet care. He was saving the ranch not just for himself, but for a future he now dared to dream. Blackwood straightened, his face contorting into pure rage. Then you are a fool, Callahan. A sentimental fool who will lose everything. Not just the ranch, but your dignity, your very shirt. He jabbed a finger towards Jack's chest. I will see you lose every last cent. I will sue you for breach of contract, for wasting my time, for punitive damages. I will ensure no one offers you a handshake in this territory. You will be ruined. His voice rose to a shout, echoing across the ranch. Jack stood firm, absorbing the venomous words. They washed over him without penetrating his resolve. He saw the hatred in Blackwood's eyes, the worry of a man denied. He knew the threats were serious. Blackwood had the power to make his life hell, but the fear that had once paralyzed him was gone. A quiet, burning determination filled its place. "Do what you must, Blackwood," Jack said, his voice calm, steady, a counterpoint to the lawyer's rage. "I will not be bullied. This ranch stays." He stepped back, signaling the conversation was over, his decision final. The scent of dry earth, of his home, felt like an anchor. Blackwood stared, chest heaving, face red. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He realized Jack was immovable. The man before him was not the defeated rancher he expected. A fire burned in Jack's blue eyes, a stubborn resolve Blackwood had underestimated. He saw Jack's deep connection to the land, a bond he could never comprehend. With a snarl of frustration, Blackwood spun on his heel. He stomped off the porch, his polished boots kicking up dust. He practically threw himself into the carriage, slamming the door shut with a violent crack. "Drive!" Blackwood bellowed, his voice muffled but audible. The thin, nervous driver snapped the reins. The horses lurched forward. The carriage wheeled around, sending a fresh cloud of dust into the clear sky. It sped down the drive, its sound growing fainter, until it was a receding black speck on the horizon. Jack stood on the porch, watching until the carriage vanished, until the dust settled. The air, heavy moments before, now felt lighter, cleaner. Relief washed over him, a wave of exhilarating freedom. His shoulders relaxed, tension easing. He had done it. He had stood his ground. He had saved his home. He looked out at the vast, silent land stretching towards the jagged mountains. The sun warmed his face. He felt a deep connection to every inch of it. Wind whispered through the sagebrush, a comforting sound of endurance and new beginnings. He knew the fight was not over. Blackwood would make good on his threats. The coming months would bring hardship and struggle, but he was no longer alone in this fight. He had a powerful, unspoken reason pulsing within him. He had chosen the ranch. He had chosen his future. Now he had to find Eleanor. Silas Blackwood's carriage rumbled away, leaving Jack alone in the desert dust. A strange lightness filled him. The ranch, his heritage, was saved, but tied to a woman he barely knew. She had carved herself into his future. The choice was made. He had to find her. Relief and a terrifying hope pulsed in his chest. He had fought for this ground, but now knew he fought for more than soil. He fought for a life made whole by Eleanor Vance. Her face, vivid in his mind, promised a future he had not dared to dream. Her intelligent, hazel eyes, her dark hair, her elegant dress. These images fueled him. He could not waste another moment. The sun dipped towards the western horizon. No despair could hold him now. A new urgency vibrated through every muscle. The ranch house, once a burden, felt like a launching pad. He secured the house, latching the door and closing the heavy wooden shutters. He checked his horse's trough for the night. He packed a canvas bag with clothes, provisions, and his meager savings. Each item felt like a commitment, a step towards the unknown. He ran his hand over the kitchen table, where the unsigned contract had lain. Only a faint indentation remained, a ghost of the choice he almost made. He smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. This was an advance, not a retreat. The night passed slowly, filled with restless anticipation. Every shadow whispered her name. Every creak suggested her footsteps. He replayed their shared glances, brief touches, and words. He remembered her listening, her empathy, a lifeline for his family's debt. He thought of her sharp mind, her simple fix for the fence. He recalled their shared laughter, a rare sound echoing across the dusty yard. Their eyes met once across the corral, a spark of recognition. These memories pulled him forward. He was up before dawn, the air cool with sage and damp earth. He saddled Buck with deliberate movements. Buck nudged his hand. Jack stroked his neck. "Crimson Creek, boy," he murmured, his voice rough. "We're going to Crimson Creek." The sun broke over the eastern mountains as he rode out. Whispering Pines looked different this morning, less a tomb and more a foundation. The wind, usually mournful, carried a hopeful tune. He rode with purpose, a focus long absent. Miles rolled under Buck's hooves. The familiar landscape offered a new perspective. Jack scanned the horizon for possibilities, not threats. His mind raced, imagining seeing her again, the words he would say. He rehearsed them, discarded them, started over. Would she remember him? A knot of anxiety tightened in his stomach. Crimson Creek appeared on the horizon, a cluster of wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. The scent of wood smoke, the distant hammer, the murmur of voices drifted towards him. It felt new, charged with tension. Here his fate might be decided. He dismounted at the livery stable, handing Buck to a young stable boy. His legs felt unsteady. He walked towards the main street, sweeping his gaze over storefronts, searching for her face. Every woman who passed brought a jolt of anticipation, then disappointment. He started his search methodically, trying to appear casual, but his heart pounded. He stepped into the general store, the air filled with coffee beans and dry goods. Old Mr. Henderson, perched behind the counter, looked up. "Morning, Jack," Mr. Henderson said, his voice raspy. "Fancy seeing you in town." "Morning, Mr. Henderson," Jack replied, keeping his voice even. "I'm looking for someone. A woman. Passed through here a few days back. Dark hair, hazel eyes. Very distinct." He felt clumsy describing her. Mr. Henderson stroked his chin. "A lot of folks pass through, Jack. Can't say I recall anyone specific. Buying anything particular." Jack remembered her broken automobile. She was traveling alone. Henderson shook his head. "Can't place her, son. Plenty of broken conveyances. You sure she came into town?" Cold doubt washed over Jack. He thanked Mr. Henderson, his voice hoarse, and stepped back onto the street. The sunlight felt oppressive, the town's sounds grating. He had hoped for a simple answer, a clear path. Instead, he found a blank wall. He tried the saloon next. Swinging doors creaked open, revealing a dim, smoky interior. The air was thick with stale beer and sawdust. A few men sat at tables. Gus, the burly bartender with a walrus mustache, wiped the counter. "Jack Callahan," Gus boomed, a smile on his face. "Long time no see, stranger. What brings you to the thirsty side?" Jack gripped the bar. "Gus, I'm looking for a woman stranded near my place. Had an automobile. Heading towards town or through it." Gus paused, his rags still. He squinted. "A woman with a broken car, eh? Lots of those. Alone? Any description?" "Dark hair, intelligent eyes," Jack repeated, the words hollow. "Elegant, practical, spoke clearly." A flush crept up his neck. Gus shook his head. "Doesn't ring a bell, Jack. Most women here are with families or, well, not usually riding alone in fancy machines." He shrugged. Disappointment struck like a physical blow, a dull ache in his chest. He had envisioned a joyous reunion. He hadn't accounted for the anonymous churn of a frontier town where people came and went like the wind. He thanked Gus, leaving the saloon doors to seal him in despair. He walked aimlessly, his boots kicking dust. Hope dwindled, replaced by cold fear. What if she had continued her journey, forgotten him? What if he waited too long? He saved his ranch, but at what cost if he lost the one person who made it meaningful? He considered the blacksmith or the stable, but Henderson and Gus's answers suggested no distinct memory. She was just another passerby. His eyes burned, tears threatening to surface. He thought himself past such vulnerability. He felt foolish. A hardened rancher, he had let himself be swayed by a brief encounter, by shared moments. He put all his hope into a woman he barely knew. The idea seemed absurd, yet the ache in his heart was real. He could not dismiss the transformation she wrought. His steps led him to the sheriff's office. It was a last resort, a faint glimmer in his frustration. Sheriff Brody knew everything in Crimson Creek, and often what happened on the roads. If anyone knew, it would be Brody. He pushed open the small office door. The air was cool, smelling of old paper, leather, and Brody's pipe tobacco. Brody sat behind his cluttered desk, cleaning his service revolver. He looked up, his kind eyes crinkling. "Jack Callahan," Sheriff Brody said, a slow drawl. "To what do I owe the pleasure? Thought you'd be signing papers today." Jack flinched. He had almost forgotten the papers, the real reason he was in town. He took a deep breath, composing it himself. "Sheriff," Jack began, his voice strained. "I didn't sign those papers. The ranch is staying." Brody showed surprise, then a knowing nod. "Humph," Brody rumbled, setting down his revolver. "Figured as much. Heard Blackwood left your place in a huff, so what's on your mind, son? You look like you're chasing a ghost." Jack shifted, his calloused hands clenching. I'm looking for someone, Sheriff. A woman. She helped me see things differently. Stranded near my ranch, her automobile broke down. He tried to keep his voice calm. Dark hair, hazel eyes, very independent. She left a few days ago. Brody rubbed his handlebar mustache, his eyes distant. A woman alone with a broken sorrow, eh? Not many of those. Most pass through, not stopping long. He paused. Jack felt hope drain away. The pipe tobacco seemed to mock him. She mentioned heading west, I think, Jack added, a desperate attempt. Further west. Brody's eyes snapped back to Jack. A slow smile spread. Well now, further west, you say? That does ring a bell, Jack. Funny how a small detail brings it back. He chuckled, a sound that surged hope into Jack's chest. You mean, you remember her? Jack asked, his voice a whisper. His fingers locked around his hat brim, ready to crush it. Indeed I do, Brody affirmed, a thoughtful look on his face. Came in asking about directions to the next county road west. Said she needed provisions before a long journey. A very particular young lady, spoke of specialty items for her travels. Said she was going to the general store first. Jack felt a rush of adrenaline, a sudden lightness. The world, bleak moments before, brightened. The general store, he asked, his voice cracking. She was at the general store? That's right, Brody confirmed, nodding. After stopping here, she headed straight there. Said it was the logical first stop. Figured she picked up what she needed and left. Just directions and supplies, not about her car. Profound relief washed over Jack, almost buckling his knees. He hadn't been foolish. He hadn't chased a ghost. There was a tangible link. Eleanor had been here, and Brody remembered her. The details about heading west and getting supplies clicked into place. It was a fragment, but enough. He felt an overwhelming urge to move, to find her. He barely remembered to thank Sheriff Brody, muttering gratitude as he turned towards the door. Good luck, Jack, Brody called after him, a knowing smile playing on his lips. Hope you find what you're looking for. Jack burst out of the sheriff's office, the sunlight warm on his face. He barely registered the town's sounds. His heart, heavy with despair, now thrummed with fierce hope. The general store. That was the last known place. He reached Buck, pulling the reins from the stable boy. He swung into the saddle, his movements quick. The saddle leather creaked. His urgency too great, he spurred his horse. Buck responded instantly, hooves kicking dust as they galloped down the main street. The general store was a short distance away, its wooden facade weathered. Every beat of Buck's hooves echoed Jack's heart. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on the store, a fervent prayer on his lips. His future, hard-fought, now hung precariously. He rode toward it, alight with desperate, exhilarating hope. The dust of Crimson Creek Main Street swirled around Jack's worn leather boots as he swung down from his saddle, the familiar jingle of the general store's bell echoing faintly in the hot afternoon air. He patted his horse's neck, the animal's breath warm against his hand. His gaze swept slowly across the sun-baked boardwalk, lingering on each face he passed. A knot of desperate anticipation tightened in his chest with every man, woman, and child that was not her. Hope, a fragile thing he had carried all the way from Whispering Pines, felt ready to shatter under the oppressive weight of the afternoon sun, a merciless golden hammer beating down on the dusty street. He took a deep, deliberate breath, the air tasting sharply of dry earth and the distant, smoky aroma of cooking fires. He tried to steady the frantic rhythm of his heart against his ribs. He searched for any sign of her elegant carriage, for the polished gleam of its wheels, or even a fleeting glimpse of the quiet, unwavering strength that had so profoundly altered his solitary world. A wave of dread, cold and impossibly sharp, threatened to engulf him whole, to drag him back into the lonely silence he had just escaped. Had he come all this way, made such a monumental, life-altering stand, only to find himself utterly alone again? His eyes, however, drawn by some unseen force, settled on the single large window of the general store. A patch of sunlight, bright and insistent, illuminated a section of shelves within, a beacon in the uncertainty. Then, through the shimmering light, he saw her. She stood with her back to him, near a vibrant display of colorful fabrics, bolts of cotton and linen stacked high. Her dark hair was pulled back with its usual neatness, a few stray wisps escaping at her temples. The sunlight, almost reverently, caught the soft, graceful curve of her neck, a sight that sent a sudden dizzying rush, a wild tremor, through his entire body. It was Eleanor. The world, which only moments before had been a disorienting blur of anxiety and unspoken questions, snapped into sharp, clear focus. A profound, almost unbearable wave of relief washed over him, making his knees feel momentarily weak, as if the ground beneath him had shifted. He felt a deep tremor start within him, a silent internal trembling that spoke of all the agonizing fear and aching longing he had carried relentlessly for days. Jack pushed open the heavy wooden door. It groaned slightly on its hinges, a sound he barely registered. The bell above announced his presence with a cheerful, almost mocking chime, a bright sound that felt utterly out of place for the gravity pressing down on this moment. The interior of the store enveloped him in a rich tapestry of scents, the dry, woody aroma of freshly milled flour, the earthy tang of new leather goods, and something sweet, perhaps the thick, dark scent of molasses from an open barrel. He took a slow, deliberate step inside, then another, his eyes fixed on her, unable to tear his gaze away even for an instant. Other customers milled about, their voices a low, indistinguishable hum. Their forms were no more than distant, blurred shadows, their presence entirely insignificant. He watched her graceful movements as she reached out a hand, her fingers delicately tracing the woven pattern on a bolt of deep blue fabric. The simple, unconscious act held a captivating beauty, a quiet elegance that was so uniquely hers. He thought of those same hands, capable and strong, patching a stubborn fence post, or carefully holding a steaming cup of coffee on a cold morning. A vivid memory of her soft touch, however fleeting, on his arm, or the accidental brushing of their shoulders, brought a sudden surprising warmth that spread through his chest, chasing away the chill of his earlier dread. He waited, holding his breath so tightly it ached in his lungs, for her to turn. His mind raced, a chaotic storm of possibilities, rehearsing 1,000 different greetings. Each one felt hopelessly inadequate. Then he discarded them all. What did one say to the woman who had unknowingly yet utterly saved his soul and resurrected his legacy? How could he possibly put into words the seismic shift she had brought about in his lonely, predictable existence? His throat felt tight, constricted. A heavy lump of unspoken emotion lodged there, a silent testament to the journey he had taken. Then, as if sensing the intense, unblinking focus of his gaze, she slowly turned. Her hazel eyes, intelligent and deep, met his across the dusty aisle. The world around them, with all its mundane sounds and preoccupations, seemed to fall away, dissolving into a hushed, sacred stillness. The murmurs of other shoppers, the faint creak of the old floorboards beneath his feet, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer from outside, all faded into an indistinct, faraway drone. It was just them, suspended in a moment that felt both eternal in its depth and heartbreakingly fragile in its intensity. For a long, breathtaking beat, neither of them spoke a single word. Her expression, initially surprised by his unexpected presence, softened slowly. A profound tenderness spread across her features, something he recognized from their long days and quiet evenings on the ranch. He saw understanding there, a deep, silent knowing, and perhaps a hint of the very same longing that had consumed him for too long. Her gaze held his, unwavering, a powerful and silent conversation passing between them that spoke volumes more than any uttered word ever could hope to. It was a communication of the heart, a recognition deeper than speech. He remembered the quiet evenings at the ranch, the comfortable, companionable silences that had once felt so impossible, the way her eyes would briefly meet his over a simple, shared meal. He remembered the fierce, unyielding pride in her stance, even when her car lay broken and useless beside the road. He remembered the unexpected, raw empathy in her voice when he had, for the first time in his life, laid bare his deepest fears about the ranch, the way she had listened with an intensity that made him feel truly, utterly seen. All these memories, compressed into a single, potent, overwhelming instant, flooded him now. washing through him like a warm, cleansing tide. A slow, tender smile began to spread across Eleanor's face, a smile that reached her eyes, crinkling the corners with genuine, radiant warmth. It was a smile that promised comfort, a deep, abiding understanding, and a future he had dared not even dream of just weeks ago. A future that had felt impossibly out of reach. It was a smile that perfectly mirrored the raw hope and profound love that he now felt surging, almost painfully, through his own chest. A fierce, undeniable current of emotion. In that smile, he saw his ranch standing strong, bathed in the morning sun, the future stretching out before it like an open, promising road. It was no longer a crumbling relic of the past, but a vibrant, living thing, full of potential. He saw the prospect of new fences, carefully mended barns, the quiet, comforting rhythm of life returning to Whispering Pines. But more than that, infinitely more, he saw a companion, a true partner, someone who understood the silent language of his heart without a single word needing to be spoken. He realized then, with an absolute certainty that settled deep in his bones, becoming a part of his very being, that he had saved not just his ranch, that sprawling, beloved piece of land that carried his family's history, but he had also, in finding her again, found his entire future. Jack started to walk towards her, each step deliberate, grounded in this new, exhilarating reality. The old floorboards beneath his boots seemed to hum with a quiet, resonant energy, a symphony of his own making. The distance between them, just a few short yards, felt like a long, arduous journey across continents, a bridge built of shared moments and unspoken dreams. He watched her smile deepen, a breathtaking transformation, her hazel eyes never leaving his. There was a silent invitation in their luminous depths, an unspoken promise. The scent of her, subtle and clean, seemed to reach him even across the diminishing space, a gentle, intoxicating perfume. The world outside the store, with its swirling dust and its endless worries, truly faded into utter insignificance. All that mattered was the warmth emanating from her, a palpable presence, the light dancing in her eyes, the undeniable physical connection that drew him forward with an irresistible force. He knew with an absolute certainty that resonated in every fiber of his being, a deep, unwavering conviction that this woman who had been stranded by fate on a lonely, dusty road had indeed changed his entire future, and he wouldn't have it any other way.